Two people can live through the same day and come away with completely different worlds. They see the same headlines, the same numbers, the same events. Still, their sense of what's happening feels incompatible. Not because one of them is lying, not because one of them is irrational, not because one of them is uninformed, but because they are no longer standing in the same place. You can feel it in a normal conversation. One person references something that seems unavoidable, a clip, a chart, a "how can you not see this" moment, and the other person looks back blankly, not because they disagree, but because that version of the day never reached them. This doesn't arrive with conflict, it arrives with confusion. A moment where conversation stalls, where agreement feels harder than it used to, where explanation doesn't bridge the gap. You notice it in small ways. A comment that lands wrong, a reaction that feels disproportionate, a silence where you expected recognition. This is usually the moment people sense something is wrong, not with the facts, but with the space between them. Because reality hasn't collapsed, it hasn't been replaced, it hasn't been rewritten, it is quietly split. For most of human history, disagreement happened inside a shared frame. People argued about meaning, about values, about interpretation. Still, they were reacting to the same underlying world. A storm happened or it didn't. A price rose or it didn't. A speech was given or it wasn't. Even when people disagreed fiercely, they disagreed about the same thing. That overlap mattered more than we realized. It allowed arguments to resolve, compromises to form, trust to survive friction. You didn't need perfect agreement. You needed shared reference. This is usually when people forget how much everyday coordination depended on simply seeing the same environment. You could assume others had noticed what you noticed. You could assume reactions were grounded in a similar context. You could argue without first explaining reality itself. Disagreement stayed human. It stayed navigable. Because beneath it all, there was a sense of standing on the same ground. That shared ground did more than support agreement. It limited misunderstanding. It gave conflict edges. You could argue fiercely and still know where the other person was standing. When that ground existed, disagreement had boundaries. Without it, even good faith conversations start to feel unstable, like debating while the floor itself is moving. The split didn't happen through deception. It happened through personalization. AI didn't need to invent reality. It only needed to personalize it. Systems learned what holds your attention, what feels relevant to you, what you tend to engage with, linger on, or skip past. And then something changed. Experience stopped being something we shared and became something we were each served. Not just in content, but in sequence, emphasis, timing. Two people could follow the same topic, scroll the same platform, track the same event, and still absorb entirely different versions of it. One gets urgency, one gets mockery, one gets outrage, one gets reassurance. Nothing false, nothing fabricated, nothing obviously manipulated, just ranked, just selected, just filtered. This is usually where people misunderstand the shift, because your experience still feels coherent. Your world still makes sense to you. The problem doesn't appear on your screen. It appears in conversation. This is usually when people stop trying to be understood and start trying to be efficient. When you reference something that feels obvious and realize the other person never encountered it at all. When you emphasize urgency and they feel indifference. When you explain context and it sounds foreign rather than clarifying. The system hasn't lied to either of you. It has simply stopped ensuring overlap. That loss of overlap matters more than accuracy, because truth without shared context doesn't bind people together, it isolates them. Each person feels informed, each feels justified, and yet the space where understanding once formed quietly disappears, replaced by parallel certainty. A lie can be corrected, a personalized reality is harder. because you don't even meet the same evidence. At first, the differences feel surprising. How did you not see that? Why does this feel obvious to me but not to you? Are we even talking about the same thing? Then something subtle changes. Surprise fades. People stop expecting alignment. Disagreement stops feeling like a puzzle to solve and starts feeling like background noise. You learn to avoid certain topics, to soften statements, to disengage before frustration builds. Not because you don't care, but because explaining feels exhausting and being misunderstood feels unproductive. This is usually when divergence stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling structural. Not something to resolve, but something to manage. People retreat into spaces where alignment is effortless again. Feeds that confirm, communities that echo, conversations that don't require translation. Not because they reject others, but because constant misalignment drains energy. This is the quiet normalization, a world where difference isn't alarming, just expected. And here's the part most people miss. The system doesn't have to radicalize you, it only has to tire you out. Over time, expectation reshapes behavior. People stop reaching across gaps that rarely close, not out of hostility, but fatigue. When alignment feels unlikely, curiosity weakens. And when curiosity fades, distance stops feeling tragic and starts feeling practical. A world like this still functions. Markets open, systems run, institutions operate, people cooperate when incentives align. Still, something fragile enters the system: trust. Not trust in people, but trust in shared understanding. When you can't assume others are seeing what you're seeing, every interaction carries uncertainty. You simplify, categorize, label. You stop assuming misunderstanding is accidental. I didn't realize how much shared reality quietly held things together until it stopped being something I could rely on. That loss matters, because once shared reality is gone, rebuilding it isn't just cultural, it's deliberate. It requires time, patience, and willingness that systems optimized for speed don't reward. And when rebuilding feels slow, while divergence feels effortless, the system quietly teaches people which direction to choose. Because without shared experience, agreement requires effort. Empathy requires imagination. Coordination requires translation. And when everything requires work, fewer people attempt it. Over time, even institutions adapt. They stop speaking to the public. They speak to segments, different messages, different frames, different assumptions about what you've already seen. Reality doesn't disappear in this world, it fragments. What remains is a collection of internally coherent experiences that rarely intersect. The danger isn't that people live in illusions, it's that they live in worlds that don't touch often enough to correct one another. And once shared reality stops being the default, rebuilding it becomes intentional, slow, and rare. If this made something in your own life click, tap like. It helps surface conversations that usually fade before they're finished. Subscribe to AI Unlocked, where we explore how artificial intelligence is quietly reshaping reality, power, and what it means to live inside the same world. And if someone you know feels impossible to reach lately, share this with them. Because disagreement isn't always about belief. Sometimes it's about what you were shown. Because the future isn't coming, it's already here.